Hello, this video will serve as an introduction to week 4. So in week 4, we are going to be kind of, in a way, wrapping up chapter 1. Some of the sections in this week are a little bit shorter, and we're going to focus in on really the significance of the research, your purpose statement, which is fairly short, and your research questions, which are really short. We are also going to be looking at the definition section as well as the researcher positionality. However, those two sections are really truly going to be a draft right now because until you really get into, the research in terms of the literature and the methods, it's sometimes hard to, for example, know what terms you need to define to have that list there. And in respect to your researcher positionality, until you really decide on your methods that you're going to make match your problem of practice, it can be a little bit of a challenge to address your researcher positionality in any level of specificity. So we're also going to be writing those sections again with the understanding that this is a living document and you're going to be coming back to edit, especially those two sections in chapter 1. So you're going to be, again, looking at the chapters in the textbook, okay? Also, I provided you with some resources on how to write those research questions and developing your research questions. You will also notice that there is an optional, I'm going to say that again, optional activity that you can do with AI if you want. If you want nothing to do with AI, again, this is optional. But once you've already created your research questions, you've read the readings, you have read the additional resources, and you think you have your research questions. Those are probably going to be, I would say, probably 3-ish, maybe more research questions. I wouldn't go crazy with the number of research questions you have because your analysis section could get a little complicated. But once you have your research questions and you're pretty, you think they're pretty strong and solid, you can, if you want, choose to participate in this refining your research question activity. And you can choose whatever AI you would like if you want. Again, totally optional. And I gave you a prompt that you can enter into AI of your choice. And basically, it's going to ask you to ask AI to strengthen your research questions using some of the resources that are provided in the course. Okay. So, for example, this first prompt is talking about the guidelines for clarity, specificity, feasibility, and alignment to your purpose statement, as well as phrasing and vagueness, etc. So this is an activity not to write your research questions in any way. This activity that's optional helps you, I guess, get feedback and strengthen your research questions once you already have them. You can see that each one of these numbers gives you a new prompt for a different set of criteria to kind of improve your research questions. You can choose to do this. You can choose not to do this. You can think about, answering those questions yourself about your research question. That would be another way you can approach this. Or you could give these same prompts to your critical friends and ask them what they think about your research questions in respects to each of these different types of criteria. Regardless of how you do it, AI, critical friends, yourself, make sure you have strong research questions and you test them, because the research questions are literally going to, from this point out, guide every aspect of your dissertation. Okay. Another caveat, I've mentioned this before, your chair and your committee have the end all be all say on your dissertation. That includes your research questions. I am by no means, a subject matter expertise in your area, nor am I a methodologist expertise in your area. They might ask you to change them, and that's totally okay. It's part of the process. You could get all the way to your proposal defense next semester and they ask you to change them or reword them in your proposal defense. That happens all the time. It's totally normal. My committee asked me to completely change my methods. I wanted to study race. Some of you know the story. I wanted to study race. I had taken all the quant courses, I developed a survey, started to pilot it, and guess what? They were like, you can't get to the heart of what you wanted to get to the heart of and answer these research questions with just quantitative. You need to use qual, you need to do interviews, you need to sit down and talk to these people. So I had to rewrite everything. I had to take a whole set of qualitative courses and interviewing techniques and everything. So this is a normal part of the process that you might need to change this. Just because Dr. Schilling says you have the pieces in here does not mean that's what you will end up with in your dissertation, right? I'm more format and structure than I am subject matter expert or methodologist. So FYI on that. All right, what your actually required assignment is for this week is you are going to be, again, finishing up chapter 1. You're like, holy Batman, I just started chapter 1, right? These sections are not very lengthy sections. Now, the significance section, it can be a little bit lengthy. You're really saying in the significance section who's going to benefit from your research. So think about students, teachers, leaders, policymakers, any other stakeholders relevant to your context, and then describing how each of them will benefit from this. You should most likely use citations from other literature, etc., to support your statements in this section. Okay? Then you're going to clearly state in the purpose statement section, your purpose, and clearly state, also restating kind of like, this is the purpose of my education or my problem of practice. This is the purpose of my research. Here, why, etc. Reminder, everything is de-identified whenever you talk about your location and the scope of your project. As well as, participants and anything like that. And then your research questions. You could have research questions like 3, or you can have sub questions, however this looks to you. Okay. And then you are going to also do the definitions and role of the researcher sections, but those might change significantly. And I recognize that this is going to definitely be a draft in respect to those sections. I'm going to go ahead and reference that, dissertation template again for each of these sections, just so that we're clear. So again, significance, here's the items in the checklist. Clearly state at the beginning who's going to benefit from your researcher, and then describe each one of those stakeholders and why they would benefit from your research. You should be using, again, as I mentioned, citations and references. This should be a narrative, not a list, and be thorough, okay? Connect it back to your purpose statement, right? Your purpose statement, this is a lot of times not a very long statement. Again, you're restating the purpose of my research is, and this is what very briefly I'm thinking about doing for my research, right? So here's where my organization is, and here's how I'm going to potentially collect the data, and here's maybe my participants, etc. Very brief. Also narrative, no lists. And then the research question. This is probably like the shortest question, or the shortest section, but it is one of the most important sections of your dissertation. You're going to say the research questions that guided this study are, and this is where you actually can list them. Usually in numeric format, and maybe that's 3, maybe that's 2 with sub questions, however that looks for your study. It's going to be different from study to study. All right, now the definition section and the role of a researcher, I already mentioned this. These are really going to probably change over time. Where you can start now, look at your research questions. What are the keywords in your research questions? They probably need definitions, okay? So, what might those definitions be? Where might you get those? My recommendation is to look at the literature. How do other people define it? Go to wherever they defined it. So a lot of times your definitions are coming from national organizations. Like, so I research superintendents. Maybe when you define superintendents, you get that from AASA or something like that, right? I do burnout research, right? I use the Copenhagen Burnout Inventory. And so I went to the authors of the original Copenhagen, who created the Copenhagen Burnout Inventory, and I define in my research burnout and the different constructs of burnout within my instrument and my research the same way, and I cite word for word how the original authors and researchers define those concepts and burnout. Okay. That alignment is really, really, really important in saying that up front. You do need to choose what your definitions are going to be, and that will guide how those definitions are enacted throughout your dissertation, especially your methods and how you're going to analyze that, and then come back around in chapter 5 in your discussion and talk about that. With the understanding that your chair and your subject matter expert and even your methodologist can jump here and say, I think there's a better definition. You can get those definitions also from the literature. Like, you'll start noticing the more you read literature on your topic, there's probably going to be the same definition that keeps coming back around by the same person or the same group of people. You're not citing the citation, the article that cited this. You got to go back to the original research and find that author and that original definition to use here. Make sure in this section that if you use quotes, that APA requires you to have the author's last names, the year of publication, and the page number. Watch out for that in your dissertations, because you do not want to have to go back and search for page numbers for all of this. Just do it right up front. And then the role of the researcher. This is you. Who are you professionally? How does that relate? What is your educational experience, your personal professional experience? How does that relate? And what relationship are you to the site of your study? What is your role? And this is really important, because this informs, we need to know this and know what your lens and your role are when we start to read your methods and how you analyzed your data, because that's part of, we're not separate from our roles and who we are when we're collecting and analyzing data, right? We have to acknowledge that up front. Include any biases that you might have as a result of who you are in your role, okay? How are you addressing, and thinking about Franciscan values as a lens through which you're viewing your research and your role? If you have any questions about any of these sections, feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, I think these sections, some of them are shorter, some of them are more in depth. You can again reference some of the examples, and hopefully I'll collect more and more examples. You can work with your critical friends as well. All right, thanks.